Oh,
How
I'm
have
already
you?
drawing this thing somehow.
Hmm?
It looks like I've already put dots on this. I didn't even know you could annotate it. I'm not a good with Zoom. Anyway, um, well, thank you all for coming, and do feel free to, if Mary and Kate or whoever can access the chat, keep an eye and shout out to me or put your hands up. I'm happy to take questions as we go, as there may be some things to clarify. But equally, if you want to wait till the end, have a bit more of a discussion, that's also cool. So don't be shy. I don't want this to be me preaching to you guys. Looking at who's in the room, a lot of you have all sailed double hander to some degree before. In fact, I'm pretty sure all of you have. So that's good. I'll run through a few basic concepts because this is not the focus. We're going to finish up on a bit of Feva specific stuff, but it's trying to give you a quick run through of the key messages to put across when you're coaching for double handers and the sort of everyone has a different mythology or theory behind rig tune, etc. But the same principles apply in all boats. So basically, every boat handles different. Some have carbon masts, some have metal masts. Some boats are big and heavy with not hardly any power, so you have to have everything super slack and powered up as much as you can. Other boats like I see Jana on the call with a 49er, everything's super tight and you're trying to depower the thing sometimes. So it's important you don't sail every boat the same. And that's where we start getting into rig tuning. And every boat's going to want something slightly different. But key goal is you want the boat to be balanced and have a little bit of weather help because that's when the boat's in the groove and you've got good pointing ability for going upwind and downwind. You're not compromised in terms of your speed because you've got upwind modes and everything's kind of juicy. If you get a lot of helm with the rudder and the boat's still flat, you still have a lot of helm, then your balance is way off. So that's where we're going to work at the rig first. So there you go. It's not quite what do you say, the kind of picture of him on a topper. This is just a random picture of me at one of the 15 events. But I actually quite like the picture because it's the first time I've seen we have the North Sails and they've got camber stripes on them, whereas most 15s don't. And it's actually really useful because I can clearly see the different shape of the sail throughout top to bottom and have an idea of how the mast is looking.
Tommy, I'm
But I'll
going
just
to
say,
jump in and ask stupid
yeah.
questions. Tell us what camber stripes are.
So if you look at the sail, you've got black stripes. And say on the jib, it's not so important because you've actually got the seams in the fabric, so you can see them almost acting like stripes. Whereas if you look at the mainsail, like that of a laser, again in this North Sails 15, and this is the reason North put them on actually was their radial cut, so all the panels come up from the clew. So it's actually hard to see the sail shape because you don't have any natural seams running from the luff to the leech to give you what the shape looks like. So they actually put these stickers. I actually asked for black specially because normally they're blue, but they put them on so that you actually see the shape of the sail as you look up at it. Otherwise, you're looking at a big blank sheet, literally. Cool. So, um, I guess the interesting bit is everyone will have different opinions on how to tune a boat or what you're trying to achieve. Or and some of the common questions you'll get are, the guy winning the race, oh my goodness, he can point very high, or look how fast he is, or whatever. There's always some reason they're beating you on the water. And sometimes it will come down to something as simple as the way they've set the boat up. That is just a direct 29er picture. I'm not even sure that I'm looking at closely. I'm happy with the trim of that, so disregard. But these are the sort of questions I want to try and dispel the myths. And at least, even if you don't know how to set up, say, you've never sailed a Flam 15 or you've never sailed a 400 or 49er, you understand the principles that are at play, and then you can actually have an educated conversation with anybody. So, the way I look at it, main goals of tuning any mast of any boat anywhere in the world is to eliminate the side bend and lean of the mast. Usually, maybe if you're wanting to deep power, a little bit's not too bad, but in general, you're trying to make the mast straight. You also want to set the mast rake. So we'll chat about this as we go, but just to run, set the mast rake so you've got the good balance we talked about. Set the pre-bend to match the mainsail design. Again, we'll get to that. And then control the mast bend and forestay sag. So those are the main things you're trying to achieve in pretty much any boat. I break it down, make it easy, because if you just look at a big metal stick called a mast, it can be quite confusing when you add parts and spreaders and everything else. So I always have my rig set up in 3 steps that you've got your fixed or static tune. And this again is my way of thinking about our opinion. So feel free to call it what you want. But basically, these are things that you have to do before you launch. Like once you're afloat, you have an emission changing it. So like your mast foot position, you're more than welcome to try and change that afloat. But I want to come watch when you do it because that'll be funny. Once you've put the foot in position and the mast's in, you're doing well to move it. So making sure that's in the right spot. Your spreader length and angle, again, you could probably start climbing up and down ladders and try and change that once you're at the race course, but good luck to you. So again, once you've launched, you're running with what you've got set up. Then I go to course tune, which is stuff you can change in the water, but probably not during the race. So that's things like your shroud settings, your rig tension. Some boats you maybe can't even adjust rig tension if it's purchased, but a lot of boats, once it's set, that's you racing. And then we have things like fine tune, and that's where some boats have a mast ram or other. Don't want to get into all the nitty gritty stuff, especially old school boats, but like check stays and things that you can actually control the rig during the race. Any questions so far? Before I actually get into like breaking down the things I've just talked about, or are we all following? Okay, I'll take silence as good. So I know we're talking about rig tune, but it's important to understand why we're tuning the mast. So what is the engine of the boat? Can anyone give me the answer? Or are we all just going to sit and mute? Kate, what powers a boat?
Sails.
Yes, well done. So what do you notice in these pictures? Is a sail a flat object when it's on the floor, generally? How many of you have rolled sails up? Once you lie them on the floor, they're nearly always flat. I'm talking mainsails. Don't be smart and say spinnakers aren't flat. I know that. But if we're talking pretty much mainsails, give or take, they're usually pretty flat when you lie them on the floor. But if you notice, especially here, and I'm taking a bit of an extreme example, but the 49er, you can notice compared to the pink straight line, just how much curve there is in the luff. It's actually more curved than what's on the leech. And that's the same for you've got the fin, 505, etc. All I want you to have in your head when it comes to the sails is the more curved the luff is, the more it is like how it is when it's on the floor, like then it's flat. So the more curve you put in the luff, the flatter the sail becomes. And I'm assuming you all know that a flat sail has less power and a deeper sail has more power. Happy to agree on that. So the concept is the straighter your mast, the more powerful your sail in terms of your mainsail. And the more bendy your mast, the less power you have because you're actually making the sail flatter by bending it to be in its original design shape, like the 49er sail there on the floor. Does that just fundamental idea make sense to everybody? Because that is the same in every boat in the world. We sailed in a Maka 60, which had a wing mast, so our luff curved the opposite way. But that's a whole different thing. Okay, so just so we have that clear in our heads that the sails are directly controlled by what you do with the mast. We'll move into the mast. So just a metal tube, correct? Yes and no. I've done this example as on purpose. So I'm talking about the boats that I definitely know about. So for example, in the Flam 15, the two you can actually get two different, same builder and sell them, but two different types of mast, even in a one design class. So don't just buy a boat and go, oh, it's the same mast as the guy next to me. In a laser and so on, where it's really strict one design, yes, because it's a closed class. If it's an open one design, like Flam 15, you can have different sail makers, different mast builders, etc. So just to give an example, here you've got the Selden Alto, which is for lighter crews, it's bendier, a bit more of a circular standard mast. And you've got the Selden Epsilon, which is the one that I use, which is stiffer, so it has less side bend, a bit more fore and aft bend. We'll get into the reasons why. Basically, the stiffer the mast, the more power, because it's not, as a gust hits, it's going to hold its shape better, basically. So moving on from that, then we look at the rake, because again, we're going to start simple things of moving the whole stick as one bit before we talk about spreaders and complicated stuff. So who here has ever heard of like center of effort or center of resistance, etc.? You've probably all seen something along these lines in some textbook or instructor logbook at some point. But fundamentally, every boat will have a center of lateral resistance. Doesn't matter if it's a windsurfer, a 49er, or a keel boat. There's a point of the boat that if you pushed it perfectly sideways, it won't turn. If I push towards the front, and I'm talking about me lifting a rib, just pushing it, it'll bear away. If I push behind it, it'll turn up into the wind. So what we're actually doing when we rake the mast is moving the center of effort, which is like the power of the sails, forward and aft of that resistance. Does that make sense? So if you move it aft of that, it's going to be pushing the transom down, like, away from the wind, which naturally is going to make the boat feel like it's pointing. And that's where you get your weather helm from. If it's the opposite and it's in front of your center of resistance, it's going to make the boat want to bear away. And that's where you're going to get lee helm, which feels horrendous. And most boats upwind will never have that. But going downwind is really, really fast. So some boats, and I've got an example later to show you the extreme, some boats, you really want the mast as far forward as you can going downwind and far aft going upwind. Most boats have swept back spreaders, so you can't physically make the mast go forward because you'll rip the shrouds out of the deck. Some boats, like the Star, for example, have inline spreaders, so you can actually make the mast move all the way forward and all the way back during the race. But that's getting pretty technical, so we'll not worry too much about it. But as long as we understand, mast rake basically controls the balance of the boat. There's a little bit more in terms of powering up and depowering, but we'll get to that. So I'm trying to go the wrong way. So spreaders. Who here is confident they know what spreaders do? And I'm looking at you, Dan, in terms of you've got a 400. Have you actually adjusted the length or angle of your spreader since you bought it? Be honest.
No, I just trusted Bob, to be honest.
Okay, good point. You bought the boat off that boat has won the nationals at some point and is pretty well set up. What I would do buying a boat like that is measure what their settings are and put that as like, okay, keep that in the back of my head. If anything goes wrong and I start playing with this, I know what I can go back to. We have to understand what the spreaders do. So actually, Dan, to finish that question, I know you didn't touch it, which I'm not saying is good or bad, but do you understand what changes you would make or why?
Doesn't it pull depending on how far out they are? Liam explained this to me. It's like like moving them in or out, like angle or length.
Mm-hmm.
Which you on about, angle or length?
Both. You certainly can't have one without the other. So if you sweep them back more, you've actually effectively made them shorter. So as you sweep them back, you need to make, there's a lot of
longer
tweaking. But it's just to say you're happy, you're sailing, your boat didn't feel slow when I sailed it before as well either. So again, you don't necessarily need to touch anything. And when we talk about mastering, no one's putting their spreaders on back to front and trying to come up with some smart idea that no one's come up with before. Like, we're talking millimeters difference from boat to boat usually. But as long as you understand the concept, the goal is you can answer the questions and be able to coach the people who are learning. So the real simple bit of spreaders is length to start with, which is in the diagram here, B. So on the right, I've shown you, this is on a 400. So the 400 actually measures the spreader length from the track. Whereas on the 15, we measure it from the mast wall. You'll find that in like class tuning guides and stuff, or talking in the dinghy park. You have to really understand where the reference is coming from. So for instance here, what's he on? He's on 14, he's on 144.5 or something like that length. So that's Steve Carpel. So he's slightly shorter spreaders because he's quite light, and we'll get to that now. So if you look at the diagram on the left, the real simple way of thinking about it is, even if you look at me, if I have my arms in like this and I'm getting blown around, I'm going to be clumsy. If I push my arms out, I get stiffer if I'm the mast. Okay, so the longer your spreaders, the stiffer the mast. And what the spreader actually does, when you lengthen it and your rig tension's pushing on the spreader, can you actually see my mouse just to check when I move it around? Yeah. So when you lengthen the spreader, especially we're talking the windward one because this side's nearly always gone slightly slack, it's actually pushing the spreader into the mast. So the longer the spreader, the more this section of the mast is getting pushed to leeward. Does that make sense? And because your shrouds are a set length, this section here, your hounds, becomes a pivot point. So it physically can't change because that would mean your shroud's going to stretch, which let's hope that's not happening, or else get some new gear. So by pushing the middle part of the mast to leeward, it actually ends up pulling the top of the mast back to windward. Does that make sense to people? So fundamentally, all you got to really remember is the shorter the mast, the more it lets the side bend. So it's less power, lighter cruise. When you get a gust, the mast will literally bend to leeward and help to keep power before tightening or pushing it. But if you're a heavier crew and you're looking for power, a stiffer mast, it's good because you're going to take all the power out of the gusts and you're going to keep going. One is not faster than the other. That's a really important thing to note tonight. Just because you're depowering your mast does not mean you're slower than someone else. If you're too light for a boat or your sailing ability means that you should have a depowered rig, it will still be quicker for you to get around the course. There's so many guys are just foolhardy. They just do not want to depower because they get the idea of it and they are struggling around the course, getting pushed sideways. The boat's not flat. It's just awful to watch and they're knackered by the end of the race. So a well-tuned boat is definitely quicker because we know a flat boat's fast and you want the sail to be efficient. So there's no point hanging on to the excess power and be playing dumping the sheet. And every time you use the main sheet, you lose height. So would you rather be high and fast, or would you rather have to keep dumping the main sheet and lose all your height every time you get a gust? So do not ever think that depowering the boat is a concession or a slow thing to do. Okay, so that's spreader length. And then we go to spreader rake. So that's A here, that's the angle. Now, just to give you an idea of how to measure that, some people put a stick across like a batten. I sometimes get a bit of bungee cord and put it over the top, both sides, and pull a wee bit of tension. So you basically want a straight line, not from the spreader tips, but from the shrouds themselves, okay? And you measure from the aft side of the mast to your reference of your bungee or your ruler, whatever it is, and get a measurement. We'll get to like the class tuning guide thing to explain how you know what measurement to look for. But again, the fundamental idea is the more you rake the spreaders aft, so the more rake you put in, the more you actually push the mast forward at the point the spreaders are at. Now, we've talked about this pivot point at the hounds can't move because it's fixed on your forestay and the foot can't move because it's in the foot of the boat. So if you push the spreader aft, the middle of the mast has to go forward. Does that make sense? So that means you've got to bend your mast. So the more you sweep the spreaders, the more bend you put in the mast. Like this picture here, for example, you can see how much the bend in the mast is to match the sail. TC, what did we say at the very start about sails in terms of mast bend and flat and deep?
Until you put it on a mast and then it creates the curve in the luff.
Okay, perfect. So the straighter your mast, the deeper the sail. Now, I'm not talking about outhaul, kicker, all those controls that you adjust during the race. We're talking about literally on the shore before you even launch. You've decided you want to have a deeper or a flatter sail than the guy next to you, usually on your crew weight or your sailing style or ability. Okay. So Dan, does that sorry, I can't speak. Do those two things add up to what you were thinking about Liam was telling you?
Yes, I remember saying about something about how far they're back. If they're back further, it's more powerful or something. But what I'm asking, I've got a question.
Yeah.
In the one that you're saying on the left is less with their. Why they? Sorry, in this part when it says both they're less power.
Oh, sorry. That's actually a spelling thing. Oh my god, another one. That should say more power. It's because I was being lazy and copied, didn't paste it, and didn't change it. So where it's on the so you're right. I've changed the bit where it's less pre-bend, etc. That's right. But the bit where it should say more power and heavier cruise on the one on the right.
Quicker. Well, not more powerful.
Yes. So the straighter your mast, the more powerful your sail is before you've even bothered touching any other control in the boat. Okay, because you basically put, we're pushing. If you look at the picture here, if you straighten this mast, the luff physically moves towards the leech, but the leech can't go anywhere because the boom's the same length and the top of the mast is the same position. So by pushing the luff and leech together, you're creating more depth in the sail. The more bend you push this mast left in this case and pull the luff away from the leech, the flatter the sail is going to become. Does that make sense? Okay, so again, it looks all super complicated. You look at spreaders, there's nuts and bolts and pins. Every spreader has a different function of how they work. Like in this example, he's got the wee windy versions. There's some that you actually have to change the pin here. There's some, for instance, in the 29er that you cannot adjust the length or angle of a spreader. So happy days, don't even worry about it. So now we're talking more about rake and rake tension. And Jenna, I haven't actually sailed a 49er in terms of tuning rig, but we're not going to get into numbers of spreaders, but can you adjust the spreaders in the 49er, right?
Yeah, so You have the lower shrouds and caps, but you can adjust them all.
Yeah, cool. So it's basically, again, another reason we'll be doing it before we go afloat is once this guy has his spreader set and puts the boat back upright, I mean, it's pretty decent effort to be capsizing his boat to adjust the rigging for a start, but I think it's for demonstration purposes. You're not really going to touch the spreader again. If I go out in a Fan 15 Nationals and day one is 5 knots of breeze and day two is 25, I might jump up on the gooseneck of the boom and wind the spreader slightly further aft, maybe. But usually once I've got them set, it's down to fit the type of main that I'm using, and I won't change them no matter what the wind condition is, but they've been designed to suit the actual mainsail that I've chosen. And again, I'll get to that in a sec. So now we kind of have an idea of mast rake, so position fore and aft, and we have an idea about what the spreaders do in terms of changing the bend and shape of the mast. The important bit is how we bring it all together. So putting the mast in the boat. This is a bit that people sometimes overlook. And for instance, in the Feva, you put the mast in the hole and you close the collar, job done. So you can't really get it wrong unless you don't put the pin in. In some boats, though, you'll find like a mast step like this. So here, for example, you can see there's loads of different holes down the side. And the idea is you can move these bolts forward and aft. So you can actually change, you're not going to move the mast, you know, a foot forward or a foot back, but you can fine tune it a few mil. The general rule is the further you move the mast forward in the boat, the more powerful it's going to be because you're effectively, it's the same as making the spreaders rake less because you're moving the mast further away from where the shrouds and spreaders are. Does that make sense? If you move it back towards the spreaders, you're actually making more bend in the mast. So Bob and I are actually experimenting in the 400 at the minute. We've got our mast foot as far forward as you can, so it's against the king post. Bob likes it, and I'm not convinced yet because at the weekend, anytime it was gusty, the thing was fast, but it was a bit of a handling. So we're still experimenting even within the class. So again, don't get super technical. Just make sure you're in the right spot. You'll have to check on your class. So for instance, in the Flying 15s, they give you the mast foot position for the main or for the mast is from the transom. But from the transom to the mast foot, you have bulkheads and blocks and pieces. So you have to go along the hull, through the bailers, up through the floor, measure the keel bolts. It's a mess. I did it once just to get a ballpark, and I haven't touched it since. But as long as you know every time you put the mast in, it's going to go in the same spot, and you're happy with that spot, happy days. So the mast is in. Can put it down through the hole in the boat, push it forward and connect it onto the ram, depends on whatever holds your mast up. Make sure it's not going to fall down. And then we put our shrouds in, and we'll get to shroud adjusting in a sec, but make sure basically the shrouds are square. So the same on either side, and the mast is straight. You can't really see it in this picture, but a cool thing that Steve Carco's done here is he's actually got a bit of bungee cord and tied it from the rudder stock or the pintle right up to the top of the mast with the main halyard. So you can now sight, and again, you can't see the picture, but I'm sure in daylight, you can look, stand back and actually watch that go the whole way to the mast. Another one I do is you can run your eye up from the gooseneck, or if you pull the main halyard really tight to the gooseneck and look up the mast, you can see if the mast is bending or not. It should line up with the halyard the whole way up the track. That's where you want to check that your spreaders, when you're raking them back, you don't put 10 turns on one side and 5 on the other, because now it's still not square. So just make sure the whole mast is square and plumb in the boat. A little thing in my 15, for example, for whatever reason, I'm on say 5 holes here and 4.5 on the other side because the deck's just not quite square whenever I get my mast straight. So I'm on slightly different settings side to side to make the mast straight in the boat. And apparently that's not uncommon. So don't just check they're in the same hole and assume it's fine. Not every shroud is going to be made millimeter perfect in length. So make sure your mast is straight. Okay, so we talked about mast rake. In terms of adjusting mast rake, you have many different ways of pulling the mast back, but fundamentally, you've got most dinghies will have these clevis pins into your like chain plates. Some boats will have more of a bottle screw one, so these are ones same as the Sonata or a lot of keel boats. You can tell by looking at it, you're not going to play with it too much. So straight away before you even sail a boat, you know whether it's a boat you're going to play with the rigging every day or whether it's a boat that you kind of get it right and leave it. So like on the Sonata, I have this set and then the rope tied between the 2 holes and it's not moving. On the 400, the fact that this is on a fast pin that you can pull out tells me that this is something I might adjust day to day or even race to race. Fundamentally, moving it down, so coming down the holes, will effectively shorten the length of your shrouds and therefore make your mast appear to come aft. Everyone happy with that concept? So moving down on the holes is going to make the rake come aft, and moving up will move your mast forward. All right. And again, general rule for that is going down is going to help you point because you're moving the center of effort further aft in the boat. It's going to help your helming and pointing ability, but it will depar the boat. So that's why you'll find a lot of guys when it gets windier start doing it, because it's actually going to depar the boat. There's a few reasons we can chat about at the end, but it moves everything aft. If you think your jib car, for example, has not moved, but the angle of the jib has now moved, you're effectively opening up the whole leach on both sails just by moving the mast aft. If you move it forward, you're going to power the boat up. And the only thing I wanted to point out, sometimes in light winds, there's definitely a little bit of playing to be done. If you make it very straight and you have loads of power, you have so much power and speed, you get better grip, so you actually feel like you're pointing upwind anyway. But you've moved it forward, so you won't feel like you've got any weather helm. Some people in light wind rake it quite far off to really load up the rudder and get a lot of helm, but they've deparred the boat to achieve their pointing ability. So there's a little bit of anything under 8 knots, there's a little bit of user error and just sort of down to your own feel on the rudder, how you like it to feel. The fundamental thing is you want the mast aft going upwind because it helps you point and depars the boat when you're going upwind, which is usually what you want. Going downwind, if you could rake the mast all the way out the front of the boat, happy days. You know, you're getting more depth and you're getting more speed, but most spreaders and boats won't let you do that sort of adjustment. So rake tension. We've got spreader set up. We understand what we're trying to achieve with the mast. Mast bend, etc. The next thing to do before we launch is put the rig tension in. Most dinghies is the fact that you connect the jib onto the halyard, and the jib halyard itself becomes the way you can add the rig tension. That's the same as it is in the Feva 15-400. Some boats will have a forestay that the jib is hanged onto, and it might even be the forestay that you're actually pulling the load on. But fundamentally, what you're doing is putting the tension into the shrouds. So there's 2 examples of how to record it. This is more of an old school Peter Kennedy special. They like to look at numbers and they can't think past 20 or 30, but they don't know what the tension is. It's just a reference. So 28 is 28, but you couldn't tell me how heavy 28 is. I have one of these, which gives you in kilos. So for example, Peter Kennedy would race with 28 on the loose gauge. I race with 180 kilos on this. It's actually the same setting because we tried it on the 2 boats just to get a reference. The key thing though with the rig tension, if you think about if your shroud snaps, the mast is going to fall over. So the shroud holds the mast over, holds the mast up. That's great. But how tight you put it also controls the mast. The tighter you put it, the more pressure it's going to put on the spreader, as in the windward spreader. The more pressure it puts in that windward spreader, the more it's going to push it to leeward and pull the mast stiff and straight again. If that makes sense. So more rig tension generally means more power. But you can overdo it to the point where the mast is so rock solid, every single time you get a gust or a wind shift, you're having to steer and play the sheets a lot because there's no forgivingness in the whole setup at all. So some people who struggle and aren't quite getting enough height, and if the breeze drops off or it's really gusty, I'll let off a bit of rig tension and just make the boat a bit more forgiving because the mast can actually flex and move a little bit just to make it a bit easier to steer. Once I get dialed in, flat water, happy, I'll start creaking it back on again. The 15, you can adjust it live. The 400 you probably can, but there's quite a lot of load on it, so it's sort of set up between races, and that's you. The other thing to controls is your forestay side. So the thing to say is any boat with spreaders swept aft, like a 49 or a Flam 15 400, generally want to run a tight forestay. They don't want any forestay sag. As soon as you get forestay sag, you're going to lose pointing ability and you're going to lose power. Boats like, say, a Snada or a Naturals or anything with a spreader are actually horizontal or in line. Sometimes in light winds, you're happy to have a bit of forestay sag, but the rig tension doesn't actually affect your forestay sag on those boats because it's only holding the mast side to side. But because your spreaders are swept aft, your rig tension is literally pulling on the forestay. Does that make sense? So if in doubt, I would usually run a bit more forestay tension than you think, because it will definitely help you point and it'll definitely help depar the boat. When it gets really, really windy, I would start to let it off again. because it lets the mast just fall to leeward and just lets it absorb the gusts a little bit more and lets the spreader flex to windward, which lets the mast top bend away. So it just lets everything absorb the gusts. And if it's really light winds, again, I might ease it just to get the boat a wee bit more feeling again, because if it's too tight, it gets all a bit stalled up. There's a lot of this rig tension chat where it's hard to get without going into physics and emphasize the feel of the boat, if that makes sense. So how we talked about rig, we want to find something so we know what we're going on. So I don't just put the mast in and go, right, yeah, it's the same as last time, happy days. I'll just check the rig. So set your reference. Now here he's measuring to a gooseneck 80. Most dinghies, you go to the gooseneck. Plan 15, there's a band here, but again, it's at the gooseneck. And every boat manufacturer tuning guide will tell you, so I think in the 400, it's 6 meters 80. You put your tape measure onto your main halyard and hoist it until you get 6 meters 80 at the gooseneck. Don't worry about that number for any other boat. Like that's just for the 400 because this is what this boat is. And that's what I remember. So make sure you check what your boat uses. You then swing it aft to the reference point. So in the 400, we use the, well, I don't know if you call it a transom, sort of a transom, the rudder mount, and you measure. So he's running off 6965, which is kind of a standard setting for the 400s. So you can see there, so 656, like it's curved, it's not perfect. Plan 15's got a bit more of a sharp edge. You can actually get a better idea of the number. You'll start to get quite good at it. So I know in a Flam 15, if I go down one hole on my shrouds, it's equivalent to an inch or an inch here. So without even measuring it, I know by going down a hole how much I would just change my rig tension, and it'll be slightly different every boat because masts are different lengths and stuff. So we put the mast in, we make the mast centered, we get the pins and stuff what we want for the rig. We put the rig tension on, there's your gauge there. Once it's up to par, we're all happy days. Make sure you don't have the boom on, or you've got any other bits and pieces tied, or you don't have a flipping spinnaker halyard tied to something else with the spinnaker up, because that will affect things. And then you measure back, get your number, note it in your phone, note it in your head, don't care. You're happy, my boat is mint. The reason I didn't win the race is because I got a bad start, not because my boat's not set up. That's the goal. Just as an example, we're not going to talk about this because it's not really relevant to most dinghies or Fevas. You've got a thing called a mast ram. Here's a 400. It's a turn screw. As soon as I put any load on the boat, I am not moving this. So that is not something I even play with like that much. Basically, it controls the bottom third of the mast. So some boats here, they have this has a ram that this is where the idea came from. The original ones had a ram ramming the mast back. So every mast, when you put the main sheet on, when you put the rig tension on, will always want to go forwards. And they're pushing the ram against it to fight that. Part of the reason you have it on some boats is if that broke, the gooseneck will probably break the mast here. So that's literally supporting the fact that you've got all the load pushing the mast forward to the gooseneck. So Etchel's masts are very thin. And we had a mast ram and our snaps, the mast literally just snapped straight away at the gooseneck and came down. Didn't actually fall in the water, just came down like on top of the boat. But that was just because this one rope here snapped. So again, same principles apply. You let the mast go forward to flatten the sail and depar, and you push the mast aft to straighten the mast. And it just gives you that little bit more fine tune. This is actually the one from inside the Flam 15 to show you that I can pull the mast forward and aft. So if it's light winds, I can pull it forward to try and point better. I can pull it aft to get more power before I even touch rig tension. So it's finding Flam 15s love using the ram rather than rig tension. Other boats love using the rig tension and don't touch the ram. So you have to really figure out what way your boat works. And it's because the Plan 15, for example, you have a lot of masts from the deck to the floor. Whereas in the 400, from this ram to the floor, you've only got about, I don't know, 1.5 feet. So it's not going to do a lot of effect. And it's on the screw, so you're not going to adjust it actively. But don't have it, all the way out and wonder why your mast's inside out. And don't have it all the way forward and wonder why it's so bendy. Just make sure you've got a rough idea of where your ram's at if you have one. Any questions so far? I don't want to keep you all night, so I'm kind of rattling on so we can get to like a bit more Feva specific, but I just wanted to make sure you guys have a bit of a grasp on rig tuning in general. It's quite you could have a session on each part, so I'm conscious I might skim a few things. Here's a really extreme example. How many of you have ever seen a star sail? Some, maybe. Okay. So they actually have spreaders. So in this picture, for example, you can't even see the spreaders, and this boat's 90 degrees to the camera. So the spreaders on a star are in line. So they don't do anything in terms of mast bend at all. All they do is stop the mast bending sideways to lee. So you might not be able to see it, but there's a stay comes here. So they've actually got, instead of having the spreader push the mast forward, they've got a rope that the helm can control. And when he lets it off, the mast naturally bends forward. And when he pulls it on, it pulls the mast straight again. So they control it that way. And the reason they do that is, well, you can see the amount of bend and how much the mast is raked back. The reason they do that is they don't have spinnakers. So downwind, a star would be the most depressing thing in the world to ever sail. So what they do is they put a spinnaker pole into the jib. They release the jib forestay off, so it becomes almost a spinnaker, which means that all the tension's on slack and then they let off these stays. So if you look here, that mast is literally over the bow of the boat, which in every other form of sailing is complete madness. That's why I actually quite like watching the star racing. It was a bit interesting, especially when they get the leeward marks with boats and they get pressure and they forget to put the upwind settings back on before they go on the mark, and the mast literally looks like it's going to fall out the side of the boat. But just an example, his mast has moved from there to there, so that's a lot of range for a mast to be able to move live from upwind versus downwind. But it's just to show how much you want the mast for downwind and how much you want it aft going upwind, and how much the spreaders actually limit your ability to do that. Luckily, otherwise, sailing these boats, I sailed one once, and it's like not an exact science. It's definitely a bit complicated, and you just need to be really heavy and eat flat out to sit here on the side. But they are quite a cool skill boat. I'm not a wizard. People who sail boats are not wizards. This looks slightly complicated, but fundamentally, when you buy a sail for any boat, all classes will have tuning guides. Some might be something that Old Davy written on the back of a cigarette packet, and it's not really worth reading. Some people write out essays on stuff, but what you really want to find is something simple like this. So we used to have P and B sails, and these were our settings. Last year we bought North sails, so these are not my settings. So these were given to us when you buy the sails from most sail makers. You will be able to go and get the sails. You'll be able to go and get the guides. So for instance, this is saying if you're using the FR3 mainsail, spreader angle is 175. If you're using the FR5, it's 185. So basically the FR5 requires more spreader rake because of the shape of the luff. So they're already telling you that. You don't even need to go and play with it. I actually have mine at 180. So I'm between the two, but I use the FR5 mainsail. So I set my whole mast up according to North, went sailing, and then just slowly, day by day, tweaked it until I have my own settings, which are not, I'll be honest, they're not a million miles off this. But the problem is, me and Pete weigh a different amount to somebody else. You could be 4 stone different than someone. They're going to want more power than you're going to want less power, so you can't run the same settings. I like to have a bit of feel on the helm and a flatter boat. Some people like to have a heeled over boat and like feel on the helm. So the flatter the boat, the less feel you have. So I have to set up my boat to give me feel if I'm going to sail it flat. They've also then give you some quite interesting stuff about how much main sheet you use, how much jib, main jib halyard, and how much jib sheet, etc. So there's quite a lot of good information that you can nearly laminate that, stick it on your boat when you're doing your first few sails, or maybe make one for your club Feva sailors. And every time they rig, they have to go and make sure that they are the same and that they all understand what they're. Even give them the task of saying how much main sheet would you use in 10 knots, and let them fill out a bit of a table. You can actually see here, there's if your crew weight is 21 stone and your crew weight is 24, 26, you can see how the numbers change. So they're even explaining that as you get heavier, you need to put more power into the mast. So if you ever borrow one of my boats, do not jump in and think, oh, well, Hammy set up, it must be fine. If you weigh 10 kilos less than me and your crew's 20 kilos less than my crew, you're going to struggle. Happy enough with that? Any questions so far before we get into a little bit of Feva fun? That's kind of it on the heavy duty mast trim stuff. This is a bit more like Feva specific sort of little tips and guides, but any thoughts or questions on the mast tuning? What about you, Mary?
I was just thinking about before you brought these up, just to say, where can you find the tuning guide? Because I don't, it's not always, obviously you can ask Google, But like you say, they're quite often with sail makers rather than the class itself, depending on the class.
What you'll find is lots of sailors love to talk crap about how good they are sailing. So if you go in, so for example, RS 400, you Google RS 400 tuning guide, Steve Cockrell literally gives you his exact breakdown on everything he learned about the boat and how he learned to sail it. And he, because he's lighter with his wife, how they then managed to sail the boat despite being too light for the boat, according to everyone else. Right down to his techniques upwind, downwind, and oh, I'm thinking I might push the spreaders out another 5 mil because I'm going a bit more downwind speed. So he's literally broke down everything he thinks about the boat. So if you read his bit, you read some tuning guides, you chat to whoever the number one sailor in your club is. Like the big bit people struggle with now is like even at flying 15s, like you'll go to an event and someone go up and go, "Geez, boys, you were flying upwind today," and they don't actually ever once ask me a question that can help them in any way. Whereas if I go to Peter Kennedy and say, "Peter, your height's fucking nuts. Like I can't see every time I was beside you, I can't live there. Like this is desperate. Like what settings are you running?" Peter will let you get his phone out and show me a table, and I can be like, "Oh, you quite a lot of rake on for that reason." He goes, "Yeah," but then I just pull on more tension to get more power, despite the fact I've raked the mast more, so he gets height from rake and then more rake tension to keep the power. And I'm like, "Yeah, I might try that tomorrow." That's where you make progress because now he's bouncing off me and I'm bouncing off him. And as a fleet or as a class at your local club, you become pretty good. So when you go to the nationals, you're not guessing.
Yeah, and I think it's really good. You know, you've said the tuning guide is there as a starting point because your sail might be different. You might have a wonky hull like Hammy has. You know, there's going to be sort of differences between your boat and your sails and your kit, and then obviously the difference in you and your crew.
Yeah, and like
as well.
Pete and I were trying to figure out why our hull is wonky, for example, but there's definitely a repair quite near my chain plate. So I think Seamus just put around the garage a bit too tight one day. Because of that, I have to change the settings on my mast. But it is what it is. The mast is straight, the boat sails fast, so it doesn't really matter. It's just don't jump in a boat and assume all is well. Just make sure you've done your little bit of tuning because everything we're talking about, the fun bit about tuning, as much as it sounds a bit boring, is free speed. If your boat is tuned and everything is mint, the only reason you don't win is yourself. The amount of times you go on a club boat where things don't work and the boat makes you look bad because it's not set up properly. Okay, RS Feva, hallelujah. Before I click the next button, can anyone tell me a glaringly obvious thing different with an RS Feva than what we've just talked about tonight so far? What does an RS Feva not have?
There's no foot plate. There's just a well, and there's
Okay.
no like rail adjustment on the like you've got a kind of frictionless pulley for the forestay.
Okay, so straight away when you look at a boat, you get an idea of tuning. When I look at a Feva, the mast, I'm convinced you could put it upside down and still use it. Like it doesn't taper. It's the same thickness throughout. It's literally a piece of tube that's got a different plug put in each end and a bit of a feeder for the main gooseneck put on. But fundamentally, the mast itself does not taper off. And like Jenna, your 49er mast, the top section is like half the thickness of the bottom section, right? So the Feva is super simple that way. It's a straight bit of pipe. It doesn't have spreaders, which is huge. So when we talk about tuning the rig, there's no pre-bend, there's no spreader messing around. Dan, good point on 2 bits. You can't change the foot position, so that takes away the whole bit of guesswork, which is really good. Sometimes you will find on old boats you might want to check because sometimes there's been a repair or the tack's in a different place or the boat's just so old that it's bent and not every like an old laser will have more play at the mast than a new one around the gooseneck just from wear and tear and stuff. So, or not gooseneck, the mast step. So just still check it's all sound and the mast is still straight. Don't consider the boat hasn't come off the car on the way down the motorway and had a dodgy repair at some point. So all that said, you're right, the friction and the halyard is an issue. So we can't get loads of rig tension on, especially everything you think when I talk on Fevas. Do not think how you would sail the boat. Think how a 12-year-old kid would sail the boat. That's a really important coaching point. Do not get so technical that they have no idea what you're talking about. Because if you say shroud, they probably don't know what shroud is. They just know the bit of wire holding the mast up. So call it that, say, make sure the wires are level until they start getting that sort of vocabulary to have a proper conversation. Don't try and show off how much you know. So Little quick like coaching tips, okay? And I'll show you how we look at the shrouds for a Feva. But ideally, you say we're on base, which is like our zero setting. So if you're on that, pull the halyard on until the mast slightly bends forward. If you've achieved that, is the forestay sagging upwind? If no, happy days. Set your strops so you can center the boom. Be the seat has dropped so you can make sure the boom goes center. So make sure that's all lined up. If it is sagging, like the forestay looks like it's obviously sagging, go down another shroud setting. Okay, so that brings you back up to this section and back to this part. So you just keep going through it until by the end you basically get to the point of if there's more wind, put on the kicker and Cunningham. You're basing in the sail controls. If there's less wind, he's kicker and Cunningham. So these are the sail control areas, but that tells you the mast is good enough. Does that make sense? If you're easing kicker and Cunningham and you still feel underpowered, then you start to go to here and you have to go back down the settings to power the mast up again. But again, there's nothing technical. The main thing in the Feva is the shrouds are there to stop the mast falling over because it's got a spinnaker and a jib. The guy who won the Feva Worlds a few years ago kind of got this weird trend that got everyone excited. He sailed with the mast rate quite far forward. So downwind, what do we all say about mast rate forward? Whenever your mast is rated forward, downwind it's faster, you can sail lower. Great, happy days. So he did that. So downwind, he was flying. He's fastest boat there. That's where he won the races. When he went back upwind, you want the rig back aft. He didn't change his pins. The difference was he was like a 40-year-old man. So he just pulled on so much main sheet that he pulled the rig in by himself. 12-year-old kid can't do that. So don't set up the Feva that they're the fastest boat downwind and then they can't get back to the winter mark. But equally, don't depart so much that they capsize and they get around the winter mark perfect. But when they go downwind, they really are slow. Try and work with them and make them understand getting that happy medium. And you know this is recorded, but I can send the slides out too. That's no problem. So setting the shrouds, real basic one, because again we've got no spreaders or anything to mess with. If you put the mast in the boat, put the collar around, make sure there's no sails up. The mast is literally just standing free. Pull the shrouds down so they're tight, but don't lean on them. Pull them tight and see which hole it just about lines up with. And call that your base. So that's like your lightest wind setting, basically. And then match it on the other side. So here you're 3 from the bottom aft, for example, or whatever. Do that on the same side. And even if you want, check. And then when you go to that side and see that it's a 5, you go, oh, what's going on here? And you look up and realize the mast is bent because the dad reversed it into the garage. At least you found out. Okay. So I have some boats where the mast itself is bent and I literally put the shrouds in different settings, tack to tack to straighten it. But like that's criminal. Like you need a new mast, stop messing. Then basically as you get overpowered, come down the holes. So you're putting more rake in, as we said. So that's just a really simple way that if the kids get nothing else, when they put the mast in, put it to the closest hole of that space. As it gets windier, move it down. That's pretty cool. Dan, you said about the jib halyard. So yes, lots of friction. If you get most Fevas, yeah, go ahead.
You see there when you go back there on the clevis pin, do you ever move down a half step or you just move down a full hole?
So for the Feva, I would just do a whole hole because we're not trying to I think you want to notice a difference. If I'm out in the 400 and we're talking things fully battened boats with a lot of tweakiness and rams and millimeters make differences, I'll go half a hole at a time. But something like a Feva where there's no shrouds and you want to actually see a difference when you change it, I'll just jump a hole. So as in what Dan's saying is rather than going half a hole to here, you go down one side. So 1, 2, 3. Whereas in a 400, you'd actually go down half a hole, half a hole. Makes sense for everyone? So no, good question, Dan. But I think in a Feva, because of the age group usually and how hard up the boat is in terms of not having spreaders, if you are going to depart, don't start messing because you're going to just be chasing your tail all day, moving pins around. Getting jib halyard is probably the most important thing. Or sorry, jib halyard tension as in rig tension then is probably the most important thing in a Feva. Rig tension in a lot of boats, you clip the halyard onto a pulley system with plates and blocks and you can really get the tension on. A Feva, you can't really do that. You're purely how much jib halyard you put on is how much rig tension's in the shrouds. So as Dan said, there's a few rules. Sorry, next page. I'll show that quickly now, just to say. So the rules are, you can replace the jib halyard, obviously, for whatever rope you want, and you can rig it into 3-to-1 purchase. So if you look here, you've basically got a 3-to-1. So you've got one here and then a 3 here, and you're allowed to use one ring or thimble, not a block, because then it becomes a control system. That thimble becomes like a feeder so if you go through a thimble, it's a feeder, not a purchase. So this is how they're getting around it a little bit. I'm not saying go to every single club boat and completely mess around with settings, but this is just to give you an idea of how people are getting around getting tension put on. You're not allowed to use a block. You're not allowed to use more than one rope, and you can't replace this cleat. So as in, what they don't want you to have is some sort of cam cleat or a block on the deck that you can actually pull it in like the way you'd adjust kickers and stuff. You know, you have to tie it off. You can't just use a cam cleat. So what I've done is, and again, this is probably more one that if you get these slides, you can take this sheet and try and copy it. But basically, you take your halyard down, tie a bowline just above the gooseneck, but tie a ring into it, so that bowline's going through the ring. With the tail, come down to your cleat and lock it off and tie another loop, because this part here becomes not part of the system. Otherwise, the cleat becomes part of the purchase. And then you do your 3-to-1, so you're going from there up through the ring, back down through itself, through the ring again, and then down. That gives you your 3-to-1, and that gets you a lot more tension than if you just tie it off by put your foot in it and put your load on and then tie it off. Most Fevas, you see them going upwind, the mast is falling, looks like it's falling at the side of it, and they cannot point for a dam because the jib's just falling away. So really getting jib halyard there is going to help the kids be able to actually go upwind. And downwind, the mast doesn't fall to lee. It's just sloppy. Don't worry, it's such a nice boat because there's nothing technical. It's purely get the rig tension on. And again, you put a gauge on it, you'd be doing well to hit like 60 kilos. Whereas in the Flam 15 and 400, I run it like 160, 180 kilos. You're not getting near that with this setup. But at least it's not just a halyard tied off and then wonder why the boats are slopping around when the gusts come. Any questions on that? Everyone happy enough? That's more of a slide to picture and take.
Yeah, no. At EDYC, the cleats for our jib, we've pretty much bent all of them. I'm gonna say that they're gonna probably pretty much all break this year. I was wondering if you can replace it to a metal one.
Yeah, so what you can do, that's probably wrong, Sam, you're right. You can replace it in terms of, running repair. So yes, you could put a cleat, but it has to be a cleat. It can't be like a cam cleat. So as long as you're not changing
no worries,
the type of cleat, as long as it's still a cleat.
Okay.
And you can get metal versions that look the exact same as this. I think the newer boats actually have them in metal, whereas before, yes, they're just a bit. Are yours plastic, are they, or metal?
Ours are plastic.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the boats just came with plastic ones.
Up, and the bottom horn of it has just turned up, and they're gonna break by the look of it. Like,
yeah, well, I would drill the pop rivets out and put in a metal version, but you are like, yeah, you can change this. As long as try and keep within the rules, so get something the same size. Don't get a big one so you can get more turns on it, or don't get a cam plate. Just make sure you're doing like for like. If that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, no worries. Cheers.
I think a lot of the new boats now probably come with a metal one from memory when I've seen it, because of that exact issue. But don't forget, the Feva was designed as a training boat before race boat, and then they realized actually it wasn't a terrible boat to race and sail, and then they've started modifying it that the new Fevas are actually kind of racier looking than they are cruisy, which is why it's such a good club boat, because you can actually get a full race program ran out of it and actually start competing in events and keep a good suit of sails to one side and keep a dodgy suit of sails for training. Like here, they've got, I don't know what this is. This looks like something you'd use to make t-shirts out of, but they're using it for training, so perfect. Keep a nice shiny set to one side for your race team, etc. That's all good. Little bit on the spinnaker, and it's such a pet hate I have. Everything in the Feva, because it's plastic and has a bit of friction and nothing really works perfect. At least make sure you're giving it the best chance. So you look through the inside the pool itself, the tack line doesn't just go in and come aft. It actually has a bit of a purchase and a bit of a rope here. And it's so common that when people rig it, because you're rigging it blind, because you can't see what you're doing, they just throw the rope down it, put a laser batten or whatever, shove the rope down, grab it and pull it, and they don't realize they've actually put twists in. So just side up, make sure it all looks free to run, because those twists is just a 12-year-old's not going to pull the tack out properly. Even once all the running rigging is working perfect in the tack, tie the thing on at the right spot. Like this guy literally just tied it. So when you pull it out, there will be a point that the tack hits its maximum, where the little bobble hits the pole. This gap on the spinnaker is no use, because it's basically, you might as well have the pole off to lee at this point, and it's too high, so his luff's too open. Like, nothing about it's not great. So on reaches, it's really bad, and even downwind, he's going to struggle for a bit of speed. And again, we're nitpicking a little bit. Like if the kid could do some hoists, drops, and jibes, I wouldn't be that worried. But I'm talking about guys trying to do well in nationals and they're struggling downwind because they've got about a foot of tack line off. Like that's just criminal. So that's not do it. And then spinnaker shoot. The new boats have a better system. The way the bar is, it's a bit more up and square looking. But the old boats certainly are like this, which if I'm building a boat in a factory and I've never sailed before, happy days. I just get 2 Allen keys and then we're done. But this is like a 90-degree turn. And our kids are not bearing away to drop the kites the way they should be. They're going in on a hot reach. They've got the lay line wrong. They're trying to pull the kite down. So the kite's half the time is out the side. And then it comes through here at this and acts like a cleat and it gets stuck. And even worse, if it doesn't just get stuck here, it can actually go down the inside here and get properly jammed and then tear the kite. So a really simple thing a lot of people do is bulk out the sort of gaps by just wrapping rope and bits and pieces around it so it's like smooth anyway, like the kite physically cannot fit in there. And I know it looks pretty heinous, but duct tape or something slightly more, I mean, this is a pretty agricultural job. You could probably trim it with a bit of scissors and make it a bit more refined looking, but you're just trying to take this into more of a curve and try and make it into an actual throat. Like the 400 and so on would have a curve here. I like the 49er Jen is like a proper nice, it's just one big oval. So just try and create this, try and avoid the cam pleat scenario that you get here and just try and smooth this off. And actually, it's quite cool, sort of, it's a bit, there's not much wind here today, the sun's out, right, kids, let's go and modify the boats. This is something kids can, like, it looks like a kid did this one, in fairness. So no excuse, the kite needs to come up and out. There's also a bit here that's usually covered. Sometimes people pull back that to access bits in the boat and then don't cover it again. Make sure it's covered because your kite and bits and all can get caught. So just this should all look pretty smooth. The kite's not snagging anywhere. And that's me.
Excellent.
Any questions? I know I kind of, well, we're bang on an hour, so that's not bad. I did rattle through that pretty quick. I'm conscious I was kind of talking out. Yeah, I was trying to figure out how I could make it more interactive or get quick, cute question and answering and all going on, but a few of you did pipe up and I saw TC, I don't know, are you taking notes or are you on your phone? Oh, nice. Look at that. Good lad.
Nah, I'm doing homework here, so
I was going to ask, I'll let you off the hook, TC. I was going to ask, you keep talking about 12-year-olds and Fevas. Obviously, as a class, you can be 40 or older in racing, but our way, we see that Feva as a junior class. What's the target age that we, the our way performance, are looking for in a Feva?
So you're right. It's the beauty of the Feva. There's a few things. It's a really easy boat to sail and rig up, and it's class. I actually don't have any issue with like parents or older people sailing it because you could have a 19-year-old, like Jenna could go into Feva in 25 knots with a 12-year-old and handle it. Whereas if the 12-year-old went out with their best mate, they'd probably capsize all day. So there's definitely valuable experiences that they can get by going out with older groups. The black and white behind it is because there's no spreaders, because it's quite an easy boat to sail. If you aren't getting into the likes of a 29er by like mid-teens, you're not even looking at spreaders and proper rig tension yet, and you've never adjusted trapeze wire. So if you then have any experience or hope to try and get into like a 49er, you're starting from scratch. So a Feva to a 49er is a huge jump, whereas a Feva to a 29er to a 49er is like a staggered progression. But it's just important you go at the right stages, and it's not 16 and under is like the standard junior thing. Some people might just be so small they're not ready for the next boat, and actually another year in Feva is absolutely fine. And in the case of the Feva Nationals, you'll always get people who've moved into 29er and still jump back in the Feva to the Nationals with their wee brother or something. And that's actually kind of cool. Like because it's now risk the 29er, when they down Feva, they think's easy. and then like kids getting a big experience because big brother or big sisters teaching them, and you can create. It's just trying to create that. Avoid the politics, but just trying to educate them as to like why you're trying to move them on. But that doesn't mean they don't jump back in for an event or come and do the club regatta in it, because certainly here in Northern Ireland, one of our big things to tackle is probably the youth double-handed. I think we're getting pretty good Feva traction. We've got really good numbers of boats in the country. How many are actually active and being used is something to address, and then how many we actually actively get together at the same time in terms of a fleet for events or championships is the next stage. But my worry would always be, what do they do after Feva? And again, then they hit the next roadblock because we don't have, they are going to be too small for a 400. There's not a big bunch of 200s in Northern Ireland anyway, unless you want to travel around Ireland. And our job, I think, at the minute is trying to figure out, get the Fevas, get a good double-handed youth and junior program going, and then we can work towards how we might, as RYA, try and seed fund or help generate the next stage, the in-between stage. Because, in fact, Jenna, if you don't mind, whilst you're here, you could actually give us a little bit of a rundown. Like, how much do you think your pathway could have been helped or hindered by your progression in terms of you were did a bit of double-handed with the lasers, now you're doing 49er FX. Do you think you'd be better off if you'd done more double-handed, or how, like, give us your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think whenever I was moving into laser, it was like there wasn't really many other options. Like, it was kind of laser, else there wasn't another squad at that point. Like, the 420s were gone.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think if we had more like Fevas and 29ers, like, it'd probably work quite well.
Okay. And the reason you chose laser, and then there's always this catch-22 talking to kids and parents. Oh, well, I didn't get a 29er because no one else had one, and everyone said the same thing. So there's an element of, if everybody actually says the same thing at the same time, well, okay, if all 10 of you bought boats, there's 10 boats. Now you've got no excuse. And that's a little bit of a us thing to try and tackle, whether we start trying to run some drills and even have to borrow and beg boats to try and build a fleet until people actually start buying into it. And I don't just mean we as RYA, but definitely clubs. A lot of the feedback, clubs really want to get double-handed youth sailing going. But some of the issues are, they're like, oh, well, we've got GB14s. And you're like, yeah, but that's not what youth want to sail. So that's why they're not doing it. It's not because they don't want to do sailing. It's because the boats and the type of racing you do is not what's attractive to them. They want 29ers and they want winter leeward or short courses. So sometimes there's a bit of clubs having to not just think the youth aren't interested, and actually question, how do we get them interested?
Quick question.
Yes.
Is RYA trying to get to kind of like, we used to have the 420s, know that, but is it trying to kind of push towards the 29er now, or is it still kind of push towards the 420, or what's the kind of
I think with the numbers we have, Dan, we kind of need to focus on a boat, and certainly with the pathway reviews and the current Olympic classes and just the way sailing's going. Well, the reason they had 420 and 29er for a start was 420 being symmetric and more displacement, 29er being asymmetric. So they're very different sailing styles. And it almost pains me because I've sailed both types of boats and still have this in my heart for 15s and tactical slow boats and all the rest. But if you look at any type of sailing, right up to super yachts, symmetric kites are kind of dying off, even to the point where some yachts are running asymmetric kites and are going fast enough that with the apparent winds, they're happy not to have symmetrics. Even you sail on an Elixir, they're having debates whether it's quicker to be with a symmetric or an asymmetric, even on that type of boat, go the same angle, So what I'm trying to say is the reason we're looking 29ers is the transferable skill, sailing a 29er skiff and the balancing of it and the asymmetric and the apparent wind stuff they learn. You go from a 29er to a foiling boat, whereas a 420 to a foiling boat is a very different thing in terms of your sailing ability. So it's not just 49er is the next thing, it's 29er is actually a good stepping stone to foiling kites and everything. And yeah, it's just pros and cons. It's getting more and more removed from what our standard club sailing looks like. But if you go to the south coast of England, like, they do have clubs that have 20 plus 29er club racing on a Tuesday night and actively building the fleets. So it's not impossible. It's just in Northern Ireland, it's maybe a bit of a more smaller numbers, smaller amount of clubs. It's a harder scene, and I don't think it's going to be individual clubs to fix it. It's more of a Belfast Lock 29er group or something like that, and each club has one or two boats. And actually, if you all work together and coordinate it, you've got a training group there. Whereas if each club tries to do it themselves, it's just too much. Yeah.
I mean, I think a first step, I don't want this talk to go down into a kind of debate on the double-handed class in Northern Ireland, but I think the first step is for us all to go and have these discussions in the dinghy park with the other people in the club. We you have to go back and say, other than Sam, everybody else would like to see us other things than lasers. So go back to the club and have those discussions in the dinghy park with the club committee, anybody that will listen to you talk about it. A lot of the old salts are happy to talk about these things once you get onto it. Before we finish up, you kind of touched on class rules a little bit with the Feva there at the end, and I'm just conscious of possibly some of you guys doing the laser Europeans as well. Their class rules are important. You don't want to spend the first day or the training day of an event replacing the seal numbers on your seal because they don't meet the measurement requirements. So, yeah, have your tuning guide in one hand and the class rules in the other.
Yeah, it's class rules look like a wordy document, but if you really drill into it, there's like 5 bullet points. And you'd be amazed the amount of corners you can bend to make your book faster before you actually break any rules. Just saying. Don't weigh my 15, etc. whenever we're not at championships.
Sheila's definitely going to be weighing your 15.
No, like it's I don't ever advocate cheating, but there's some things you can do to improve a boat that push up against the class rules, but that's why the class rules let you do it. So like the 15s, you can have different types of masts, different types of sail makers. No one says you have to use all the same sail maker. You could have a different main and a different kite from 2 makers and not be breaking any rules. Other classes like the laser, you must use an Ilka sail, heaven forbid you touch anything else. So there, that's where the difference of if you ever watch moths or some boats, like they don't even look like the same boat, but they're one design because it's a open class. So if the rules say don't do it, you can't do it, but otherwise do what you want. Where some classes are closed in that unless the rules specify that you can do it, you can't do it. So just make sure you understand what sort of class you're actually sailing in. But the Feva's class rules, I recommend actually you'll just quick Google. They're not, they're designed for parents. They're not super technical. Some of them might even give you like that 3-to-1 jib halyard. The fact that it says you can do a 3-to-1 jib halyard makes you go, I can put purchase in that. That's a good idea. So they're not just limiting you, they actually educate you as well. Nice one. Well, thank you all for coming. Actually good to see a bit of a turnout. So hopefully that was of some use. We don't know, Mary, how we can do more feedback stuff, but if any of you guys had more boat or class specific technical things, that's the sort of stuff we've been talking in the office we could do more of, like RS 400's specific work weekend or a Firefly one. And I don't mean me, like I can get in British sailing team athlete who sails 49ers, do one of 49ers, for example, but is that relevant for Northern Ireland sailing? Maybe not. So have a think if there's anything our way and I can do to help you or your club or class, but you just need us to fill in the gaps and get the experts. Like these sort of sessions could be actually pretty useful in the future.
Yeah, going forward, I'm hoping to do a one webinar or get together in real life a month. And we have ideas in the office what we think you should be thinking about or learning as a coach. But we're always open to if you have a question or something that you want to get into, we'll do that. We can do that. We can arrange things around that. So at any point, email me, phone me, and talk to me about what you think would be useful. But I will also send out a survey, say what did you think of these sessions, including tomorrow night's session, and what would you like to do next? Huzzah! Time for the TV.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Cheers, thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Apologies for being late. I was at the PT. That's
That's
why.
all right.
Sorry.
Excellent.
I couldn't miss it.
I was
Good
saying,
excuse.
you're such an advocate for the laser, Sam. We need to get you doing some laser stuff.
Oh no.
Anyway.
Crap. Just try my best. Cheers. Right.
Thank
See ya.
you.
That was
Woo!
awesome.
That was really
That
good.
was, it was hard to figure out how do you make rig tune user friendly and not complicated.
Yeah.
I think you really did simplify it. It really made sense to me. And how they